I'm Maeve, 34, a school teacher, in a quaint town just outside Boston. I once thought I had it all with Ethan, my husband of 7 years. He's a successful businessman who loves nothing more than impressing his colleagues. Things were good until recently, when he started becoming more controlling, dismissing my career as trivial compared to his. The final straw came last Christmas when he handed me a list of 40 guests and coldly said, "Be ready by dawn." My face flushed hot, but I smiled sweetly. Little did he know before sunrise, I would be gone. If you're watching this story, let me know where you're tuning in from. Hit that subscribe button if you want more true stories about finding your self-worth. I promise what happened next changed my life forever. My life before Ethan was simple but fulfilling. I had been teaching 4th grade for 6 years, passionate about expanding young minds and dreaming of starting specialized educational programs for underprivileged children. My modest apartment was filled with books and teaching materials rather than expensive furniture, but I loved my independent life. We met at a charity fundraiser for my school 8 years ago. Ethan walked in wearing a tailored suit that stood out among the casual attire of most attendees. He was representing his investment firm, which was donating a substantial sum to our literacy program. When our principal introduced us, his confident smile and direct gaze made my heart flutter unexpectedly. "A teacher, that's wonderful," he said, seeming genuinely interested. "I've always believed education is the foundation of society." Over champagne, we discovered shared interests in classic literature and hiking. By the end of the evening, he had my phone number and a promise for dinner that weekend. The courtship was a whirlwind of attention and affection. Ethan showed up with thoughtful gifts that showed he listened when I talked about my interests. Rare first editions of my favorite books, hiking gear for weekend trips, flowers delivered to my classroom that made my coworkers swoon with envy. "He's quite the catch," my friend Lisa said, helping me prepare for our 5th date. "But don't you think it's a bit much, all these gifts?" I dismissed her concerns as jealousy. "He's just generous. It's refreshing to date someone who knows what he wants." Other friends were less subtle. My college roommate Jenna pulled me aside at brunch after meeting him for the first time. "He ordered for you without asking what you wanted," she pointed out. "And he interrupted you 3 times when you were talking about your classroom project." He was just trying to help explain it better. I defended, though a tiny seed of doubt planted itself in my mind. The proposal came 6 months into our relationship. A private dinner at an exclusive restaurant, a diamond ring that must have cost more than my annual salary, and a speech about building a perfect life together. I said yes through happy tears, imagining our future filled with partnership and support. Our wedding was beautiful, but looking back, it was the first major sign of what was to come. I had envisioned a small ceremony in a garden with close friends and family. What we had was an extravagant affair at a luxury hotel with over 200 guests, most of whom were Ethan's business associates and clients. "It's important for my career," he explained when I expressed concern about the growing guest list. "These connections matter, Maeve. Don't you want to support my success?" Put that way, how could I argue I wore the dress he preferred rather than the vintage style I had saved in magazines? I agreed to the formal sit-down dinner instead of the casual buffet I wanted. I invited distant relatives I barely knew because they had appropriate social standing. The first year of marriage had moments of genuine happiness. We traveled to places I had only dreamed of seeing. Our new house, though farther from my school than I would have chosen, was beautiful, with plenty of room for the family we planned to start. Ethan seemed proud to introduce me at work functions, his hand warm on the small of my back. But even then, there were signs. He would critique my outfit choices before events. "That color doesn't photograph well." "Those shoes are too casual." "That neckline isn't appropriate for a corporate dinner." I began to second-guess myself, changing clothes multiple times before we went out. It was easier to defer to his judgment than to argue. As his position at the investment firm grew more prestigious, Ethan became increasingly concerned with appearances. Our home needed to reflect his success. My comfortable, slightly mismatched furniture disappeared, replaced by designer pieces I was afraid to actually use. The kitchen was remodeled with high-end appliances I barely knew how to operate. "You'll learn," he said dismissively when I mentioned being overwhelmed. "It's important that we can entertain properly." Entertaining properly, I soon learned, meant hosting dinner parties for his colleagues where everything had to be perfect. The pressure to impress his business associates fell squarely on my shoulders, while Ethan collected compliments on his lovely home and talented wife. My friends gradually disappeared from our social calendar. When I suggested inviting my coworkers for dinner, Ethan scoffed. "Why would my partners want to spend an evening with public school teachers?" he asked, as though the idea was absurd. I stopped suggesting it. Slowly, my world began to shrink to Ethan's preferences, Ethan's schedule, Ethan's needs. The confident, independent woman who had once captured his attention was fading, replaced by someone who measured her worth by his approval. As we moved into our third year of marriage, the balance of power had shifted dramatically. Ethan's expectations for our home grew increasingly demanding. Every surface needed to gleam, every meal needed to be restaurant quality, every detail needed to be perfect. I was still teaching full-time, often staying late to help struggling students or develop new curriculum. Coming home to Ethan's critical eye became an exercise in anxiety management. "The living room looks dusty," he would say instead of hello. Or, "Couldn't you have prepared something more interesting for dinner?" I found myself apologizing constantly. "I'm sorry I had parent-teacher conferences today. Sorry I was working on grading papers. Sorry I'll do better tomorrow." Meanwhile, Ethan often mentioned how the wives of other executives at his firm didn't work outside the home. "James's wife Leslie is always there when he gets home with a cocktail ready and dinner prepared," he would say casually, as though offering helpful information rather than criticism. "Well, I'm a teacher, not a housewife," I tried to joke once. His face hardened. "Being my wife should be your primary job, Maeve. The teaching is secondary." I swallowed my retort, not wanting to start another argument. They never ended well anyway, with Ethan's superior debating skills always leaving me feeling confused about what we had even been fighting about. The dinner parties became more elaborate affairs. Ethan would invite 8, 10, sometimes 12 colleagues and their spouses with little notice. I would spend days planning menus, cleaning, preparing food, and arranging flowers. During the actual events, I was expected to be the perfect hostess while also serving the meals I had cooked. "My wife does everything herself," Ethan would boast proudly to his guests. "She's so talented in the kitchen." They would compliment the food, the decor, my dress. But no one seemed to notice how I rarely sat down during these dinners, how I was constantly refilling wine glasses and clearing plates while trying to maintain conversation. In public, Ethan praised my efforts effusively. "Isn't my wife amazing?" he would say. "I don't know how she does it all." But in private, there was always something that could have been better. The fish was slightly overcooked. The wine wasn't properly paired. The dessert was too simple. I began to dread these events with a knot of anxiety that would form days before and linger long after the guests had gone. In our 5th year of marriage, I suggested hiring occasional help for the larger gatherings. Ethan surprisingly agreed, and for a brief moment, I felt heard. A professional housekeeper named Rosa came twice a week, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. With Rosa handling the deep cleaning, I could focus more on my teaching and still meet Ethan's standards at home. It lasted exactly 2 months. I came home one day to find Ethan had let Rosa go. "We don't need to waste money on help," he said firmly. "My mother managed our home without hired help, and she had 3 children. You don't even have children to look after." The unspoken criticism stung doubly because we had been trying unsuccessfully to conceive for over a year. The fertility specialist had suggested that stress might be a factor, but when I mentioned reducing some of my household responsibilities, Ethan dismissed the idea. "Plenty of women manage households and have babies," he said. "My mother did it. Her friends did it. Maybe you're just not trying hard enough." I tried to discuss the inequality in our relationship several times, but these conversations always ended the same way. Ethan would look wounded, reminding me of all he provided: the beautiful home, the comfortable lifestyle, the vacations. "How could I be so ungrateful? I work 60-hour weeks to give you everything, Maeve," he would say. "All I ask is that you keep our home nice and support my career. Is that really so much to expect?" Put that way, it made me feel selfish for complaining. I began to doubt my own perceptions. Maybe I was being unreasonable. Maybe this was what marriage was supposed to be. Financial control tightened gradually. First, it was questions about my small purchases. "Do you really need another book? Couldn't you have found that sweater on sale?" Then it was suggestions that I check with him before spending our money. Eventually, I had to justify every purchase I made while Ethan bought whatever he wanted without discussion. My teacher's salary went entirely into our joint account, which he managed. The credit card in my wallet had a low limit that he monitored closely. "It's just good financial management," he explained when I questioned the arrangement. "Someone has to be responsible for our future." My exhaustion was bone deep and my confidence was at an all-time low. The vibrant teacher who had once organized school events and led committee meetings now second-guessed every decision. I stopped volunteering for leadership roles at school, afraid I couldn't handle the additional responsibility. That summer, I had been invited to lead a workshop on innovative teaching methods at a prestigious education conference. It was a significant professional opportunity, one that could open doors for the specialized programs I still dreamed about creating. When I told Ethan, expecting him to be proud, he frowned. "That's the same week as the firm's annual retreat at Lake George. I've already RSVP'd for both of us." "But this is really important for my career," I tried to explain. "I've been working towards something like this for years." He looked genuinely perplexed. "Maeve, be realistic. Teaching is something you do because you enjoy it. My career is what supports our lifestyle. Which do you think should take priority?" I withdrew from the workshop. The look of disappointment on my principal's face when I told her made me feel physically ill, but I couldn't bring myself to challenge Ethan's expectations. His family only reinforced the dynamic. His mother, a traditional woman who had devoted her life to supporting her husband's career, often commented on how lucky I was. "Ethan provides so well for you," she would say during our monthly obligatory visits. "A woman's greatest joy is making a beautiful home for her husband. You're blessed to have such a successful man." His two sisters, both married to wealthy men and fully committed to lives as homemakers, would nod in agreement. Any mention of my teaching career was met with polite disinterest or subtle disapproval. Though I smiled and nodded, a small voice inside me still whispered that something was wrong, that the life I was living wasn't the one I had chosen. That voice was getting quieter, but it hadn't disappeared completely. Not yet. The Thanksgiving disaster should have been my warning. Looking back, it was the dress rehearsal for the Christmas catastrophe that finally opened my eyes. Thanksgiving had always been my favorite holiday. Growing up, it meant gathering with my parents' sister and extended family for a day of genuine warmth and gratitude. No presents to worry about, no elaborate decorations, just good food and better company. This year, I had planned a small, intimate dinner. Just us, my parents, and my sister Amanda. I had already ordered a free-range turkey, planned my menu, and started shopping when Ethan dropped his bombshell 3 days before the holiday. "I invited the Petersons, the Blackwells, and the new VP and his wife," he announced casually over breakfast. "Oh, and Gerald might stop by with his family after dinner for dessert." I nearly choked on my coffee. "You invited 8 additional people without telling me, Ethan. I've already planned everything for a small dinner." He looked up from his phone, surprised by my reaction. "It's just a few more plates, Maeve. The Blackwells are considering a major investment with us, and Thanksgiving is the perfect opportunity to connect on a personal level." "But I've only bought enough food for 5 people, I protested. "And my parents are looking forward to a family dinner, not a business networking event." Ethan's expression hardened. Then I suggest you go shopping today. And call your parents to make sure they understand the importance of making a good impression. This dinner could affect our future Maeve. The next 3 days were a blur of exhaustion. I canceled my plans to create handmade place cards and instead rushed to the crowded grocery stores fighting other last-minute shoppers for ingredients. I had to buy a larger turkey, double all my recipes, and completely rethink the table settings to accommodate 13 people instead of 5. My mother offered to come early to help, but Ethan vetoed the idea. The Blackwells are very particular about food preparation, he said. I don't want to risk any home-style shortcuts. The implied criticism of my mother's cooking stung, but I was too overwhelmed to defend her. Instead, I apologized to my parents and asked them to arrive with the other guests, treating them like strangers in what should have been a family gathering. Thanksgiving Day. I was up at 5 in the morning, already exhausted from the days of preparation. By the time guests started arriving at 4, I had been cooking for 11 hours straight. My hair was hastily pulled back, my carefully chosen outfit spotted with cooking stains I hadn't had time to change. Ethan, freshly showered and impeccably dressed, greeted everyone with warm handshakes and cocktails while I finished the last-minute preparations in the kitchen. When I finally emerged to welcome my own parents, he smoothly took over the conversation, steering them toward the Blackwells, with a proprietary hand on my father's shoulder. The dinner itself seemed to go well. The food was plentiful, the wine was flowing, and conversation moved smoothly between business discussions and more personal topics. I began to relax slightly, thinking maybe I had pulled it off despite the circumstances. Then came the moment that should have been my wake-up call. Ethan stood to carve the second turkey, the one I had desperately prepared, when I realized one wouldn't be enough for 13 people. As he sliced into the breast, he frowned slightly. "It seems this one is a bit dry," he announced to the table. "I apologize, everyone. Perhaps we should stick with the first bird." The table went momentarily quiet. I felt heat rise to my face as every eye turned toward me. "Oh, not to worry," Mrs. Blackwell said with a tight smile. "It happens to everyone." "Not to my mother," Ethan said with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Her turkey is always perfect. Perhaps next year we'll have to get her recipe right, darling." The conversation moved on, but I remained frozen, humiliation burning through me. I had spent days preparing this meal, exhausting myself to meet his last-minute demands, only to be publicly criticized and compared unfavorably to his mother. Later that night, after the guests had gone and I was loading the dishwasher with shaking hands, Ethan approached. For a moment, I thought he might apologize. "Next time," he said instead, "make sure you follow my mother's basting schedule. If you had done that correctly, the turkey wouldn't have been dry." I said nothing, too tired and hurt to argue. But something broke inside me that night, a fracture in the foundation of our marriage that would soon become a chasm. The next day, my sister Amanda called. She had noticed something was off during dinner, the way I flinched when Ethan spoke how I barely ate despite having cooked for hours. "Let's get coffee this weekend," she insisted. "Just us sisters." I almost declined, knowing Ethan would question why I needed to see my sister when I had so many household tasks to catch up on. But something in her voice made me agree. We met at a small cafe far from my neighborhood where we wouldn't run into any of Ethan's colleagues or friends. Amanda watched me closely as I stirred my coffee, adding packet after packet of sugar in a nervous gesture. "What's going on, Maeve?" she asked finally. "You seem diminished somehow." "I'm just tired," I deflected. "The holidays are stressful." "It's more than that," she pressed. "I've been watching this happen for years. You used to be so vibrant, so full of ideas and energy. Now you seem like you're walking on eggshells all the time." I started to defend Ethan automatically, the responses well rehearsed. "He works so hard. He has high standards. He provides such a good life for us." Amanda reached across the table and took my hand. "Maeve, what would you tell one of your students if they describe their friend's situation the way I'm describing yours?" The question stopped me cold. What would I tell a young girl whose friend was gradually being controlled, criticized, and diminished, whose independence was being systematically stripped away? I would tell her it wasn't healthy. I would tell her everyone deserves respect and autonomy in a relationship. I would tell her that love shouldn't require the surrender of self. The realization brought tears to my eyes, but I blinked them away quickly. "It's not that bad," I insisted. "All marriages have rough patches. We'll work through it." Amanda didn't push further, but as we parted, she hugged me tightly. "You know you can always come to me, right, for anything. No questions asked." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. On the drive home, I thought about her question over and over. The teacher in me knew the answer. The wife in me wasn't ready to accept it. But the seed had been planted. I began to see our relationship with slightly clearer eyes, noticing patterns I had been blind to before. Still, I hoped things would improve. I wasn't ready to admit that the fairy tale I thought I was living had turned into something much darker. December 20th started like any ordinary day. I was grading papers at the kitchen table, enjoying the rare, quiet moment before Ethan returned from work. Christmas break had just begun, giving me 2 weeks away from the classroom. I had plans to visit my parents for the holiday, a tradition Ethan had reluctantly accommodated in previous years. The door slammed, announcing his arrival. Immediately, I gathered my teaching materials, knowing he disliked seeing school clutter on what he called his dining table. "Good news," Ethan announced without preamble. "The firm had its best fourth quarter ever. We're celebrating with a Christmas dinner here December 25th. I blinked, processing his words. "Here on Christmas Day, but we always go to my parents' house for Christmas." He loosened his tie, dismissing my concern with a wave. "This is more important than visiting your parents, Maeve. Patterson is announcing the new partnership positions, and everyone knows I'm the front runner. This dinner could solidify my promotion." "But we've had these plans for months," I protested. "My mom has already started preparing. They're expecting us." Ethan's expression hardened. "Call and cancel. Tell them something came up. This is happening, Maeve. It's not a discussion." A cold weight settled in my stomach. "How many people are we talking about?" "The full executive team and their spouses. About 30 people." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through emails. "Actually, make that 35. Patterson wants to include the international advisors who are in town." My mind raced, calculating the enormous task ahead. 5 days to prepare a Christmas feast for 35 people alone. "Ethan, that's a lot of people on short notice. Maybe we could cater some of it?" His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "Cater? Absolutely not. Everything needs to be homemade. Patterson's wife is always bragging about her cooking. This is our chance to show them that my wife is just as accomplished as his." "But I'm not a professional chef," I said, hearing the desperation in my voice. "And the timing with Christmas. Maybe we could suggest a restaurant instead." "A restaurant?" He laughed dismissively. "How would that showcase our home? How would that demonstrate that we're partnership material? No, it has to be here, and it has to be perfect." He pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. "Here's the menu I've planned. Traditional, elegant, impressive." I scanned the list with growing horror. A 7-course meal for 35 people. Prime rib, poached salmon, multiple sides, elaborate appetizers, 3 desserts. It would cost a fortune and require days of continuous cooking. "The budget," I began, already knowing his response. "Don't embarrass me with cheap ingredients," he cut in. "But don't go overboard either. I've calculated what this should cost, and I'll transfer exactly that amount to the household account." That night, after Ethan went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a calculator working out costs and timing. Even with my teacher's organizational skills, the task seemed impossible. I would need to cook around the clock with no margin for error. The next morning, I called my mother with the fabricated excuse Ethan had provided. a burst pipe in our basement requiring emergency repairs over Christmas. Her disappointment was palpable. "But we always have Christmas together," she said, her voice small. "Your father was looking forward to it so much." "I know, Mom. I'm so sorry." The lie tasted bitter. "We'll make it up to you after New Year's." I spent my entire Christmas vacation preparing for Ethan's dinner. Each day followed the same exhausting pattern: early morning grocery shopping to avoid crowds, hours of preparation cleaning in between cooking sessions, late nights, reviewing recipes and making lists. Ethan would inspect my progress each evening, pointing out tasks I had missed or suggesting improvements to my plans. "The dining room curtains need to be taken down and cleaned," he noted on the 22nd. "And we should use the good china, not the everyday plates." The good china meant washing 40 place settings by hand, as it couldn't go in the dishwasher. I added it to my endless list, ignoring the headache that had become my constant companion. On December 23rd, my school principal called to check in. We had become friends over the years, and she had noticed my exhaustion in the days before break. "Maeve, you didn't sound right when we last spoke," she said. "Is everything okay?" For a moment, I considered telling her the truth. About Ethan's impossible demands. About my growing realization that something was fundamentally wrong in my marriage. About the knot of dread that had taken up permanent residence in my chest. Instead, I assured her I was fine, just busy with holiday preparations. The practiced lie came easily now. That night, as I was painstakingly piping filling into tiny pastry shells for appetizers, my phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Patterson is bringing his niece and her husband. Also, Jacobson asked if he could bring his son who's in town from college. That makes 40 total. Make sure there's enough food." I stared at the message, a strange calm settling over me. 5 more people. After everything I had already done, after all the careful planning and budgeting, after giving up my family Christmas, he was adding 5 more people without discussion. As if my time and effort meant nothing. I was still awake at midnight when Ethan came home from his office Christmas party. I had expected him hours earlier to help move the furniture as he had promised. But he strolled in smelling of whiskey and cologne, clearly having enjoyed himself while I worked. "Why are you still up?" he asked, loosening his tie. "You look terrible. You should get some sleep if you want to look presentable for the dinner." Something inside me coiled tight, but I kept my expression neutral. "I need help moving the dining room furniture to accommodate 40 people. He glanced at his watch and frowned. "It's late, and I have an early meeting tomorrow. Just handle it in the morning." "The caterers are delivering the tables and chairs at 7. I said, the lie slipping out before I could stop it. In reality, I had arranged to borrow extra tables from the school planning to pick them up myself. Ethan's face darkened. "Caterers, I told you no outside help." "Just for the tables and chairs," I clarified quickly. "Not the food. It was the only way to seat 40 people. He stared at me for a long moment, then sighed dramatically. "Fine. Let's move the furniture now and get it over with." As we rearranged the dining room in silence, Ethan suddenly stopped and turned to me. "I need everything ready by dawn on Christmas. Patterson likes to start these events early." "By dawn?" I repeated, disbelieving. "The dinner isn't until 2 in the afternoon." "I want to inspect everything before anyone arrives. No mistakes, Maeve. This dinner could determine our future." He handed me a printed list of the 40 guests with detailed notes about seating arrangements, dietary restrictions, and his strategic placement of key executives near his position at the head of the table. "Be ready by dawn," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for discussion. "Everything perfect." My face felt hot with a mixture of anger, exhaustion, and humiliation, but I didn't say anything. I simply nodded, took the list, and watched as he headed upstairs without another word or offer to help further. Alone, in the perfectly arranged dining room, I looked down at the list in my trembling hands. 40 names. 40 people who mattered more to my husband than I did. 40 reasons why I was missing Christmas with my family. In that moment, something crystallized within me. A clarity I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't a partnership. This wasn't even a marriage. This was servitude, plain and simple, and I deserved better. I smiled sweetly when Ethan looked back from the stairs, but inside, a plan was already forming. Before sunrise, I would indeed be ready, just not in the way he expected. The house was silent at 3 a.m. when I made my decision. Ethan slept soundly upstairs, oblivious to my inner turmoil. I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by the preparations for his perfect Christmas dinner, and felt an unexpected calm settle over me. Suddenly, I remembered Lisa, a 4th-grade student from the previous year. Her mother had come to me concerned about changes in her daughter's behavior. Quiet withdrawal, declining grades, anxiety about making mistakes. When I gently questioned Lisa, she eventually revealed that her mother's boyfriend had been belittling her, controlling what she wore, what she ate, even which friends she could see. I had immediately connected the family with resources, helped the mother develop a safety plan, and supported them as they left the abusive situation. "You're so brave," I had told both of them. "You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness." The irony hit me like a physical blow. I had recognized the signs of control and emotional abuse in my student's life, but had been blind to the same patterns in my own marriage. The parallels were undeniable now that I allowed myself to see them. If Lisa's mother could find the courage to leave with a child and limited resources, what was stopping me? I had a career, supportive family, and skills. I had existed before Ethan. I could exist without him. Moving with quiet determination, I went to our bedroom closet and pulled out my old suitcase, the one I had used before our marriage. It felt symbolic somehow, reclaiming this small piece of my former independence. I packed methodically, taking only what truly belonged to me. Clothes I had bought myself or had been gifts from my family. The jewelry my grandmother had left me. My teaching credentials and favorite books about education. The photo albums from before Ethan, when I still recognized myself in pictures. I left the designer dresses he had selected, the expensive handbags that had never felt like mine, the high-heeled shoes I wore only to please him. Those weren't gifts, I realize now. They were costumes for the role he wanted me to play. At the back of my closet, I found a small wooden box containing mementos from my teaching career. Cards from students. A painted rock from a child who couldn't afford a teacher appreciation gift. A newspaper clipping about the reading program I had developed. These simple treasures meant more to me than any luxury item Ethan had ever provided. As I packed, I felt lighter with each item I chose to take or leave behind. The expensive watch he had given me for our anniversary stayed on the dresser. The simple silver bracelet my sister had given me when I graduated college went into my bag. In the kitchen, I found a notepad and pen. The letter took 3 attempts to write, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I kept thinking of new things I had tolerated that now seemed unacceptable in retrospect. "Ethan," I wrote finally, "I cannot and will not be your servant anymore. A marriage should be a partnership of equals, not a master and subordinate relationship. I've given up too much of myself trying to meet your impossible standards." This Christmas dinner demand was the final revelation I needed. I deserve to be valued for who I am, not how well I can showcase your success. I am leaving. Please, don't try to contact me. Maeve. I placed the letter on the kitchen counter, propped against the detailed dinner plans I had spent days creating. The half-prepared food sat in refrigerators and on countertops, abandoned monuments to my former submission. With shaking fingers, I dialed Amanda's number. It was 4 a.m, but I knew my sister would answer. She had always been there for me, even when I had pushed her away at Ethan's subtle urging. Hello. Her voice was groggy with sleep, but instantly alert when she heard my breathing. Maeve, what's wrong? Can I come stay with you? I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. I'm leaving Ethan. There was only the briefest pause before she answered. Yes, of course. Do you need me to come get you? No, I can drive. But could you meet me halfway? I don't want to be alone right now. I'll leave in 15 minutes, she said without hesitation. Text me where to meet. I love you, Maeve. I love you too, I whispered, realizing how long it had been since I had said those words to anyone but Ethan. I carried my bags to the car as quietly as possible, making 3 trips in the dark. Each time I re-entered the house, I half expected to find Ethan standing there demanding an explanation. But the house remained silent, as if conspiring to aid my escape. At the front door, I paused for one final look. The beautiful prison I had lived in for 7 years. The gleaming surfaces and perfect arrangements that had cost me my identity. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was I overreacting? Could we work through this with counseling? Then I remembered Thanksgiving, the countless dinner parties, the constant criticism, the gradual erosion of my independence, the way Ethan had handed me that list of 40 names with the cold command to be ready by dawn, as if I were staff rather than spouse. No, this wasn't impulsive. This was long overdue. I closed the door softly behind me and walked to my car without looking back. As I drove away, the eastern sky was just beginning to lighten. Dawn was approaching, but for the first time in years, I didn't fear its arrival. This sunrise marked the first day of my new life, and I was finally truly ready. The mixture of emotions as I drove was overwhelming. Terror at the enormous step I had taken. Grief for the marriage I had believed in. Anxiety about the practical aspects of starting over. But beneath it all, a growing sense of liberation, as if I could finally take a full breath after years of shallow breathing. My phone began buzzing within an hour of my departure. Ethan discovering my absence. I silenced it without looking at the messages. Whatever he had to say could wait. For now, I needed to focus on the road ahead, both literally and figuratively. Amanda was waiting at the agreed meeting point, a 24-hour diner off the highway. When she saw me pull in, she jumped out of her car and ran to me, enveloping me in a fierce hug before I could even close my car door. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "So proud." Those simple words broke the dam. I sobbed in her arms in the empty parking lot, releasing years of suppressed feelings. She held me until the tears subsided, then guided me into the diner where she ordered coffee and breakfast neither of us would eat. "Tell me everything," she said, pushing a mug toward me. So I did. The whole story spilled out in the quiet diner as dawn broke fully outside. The control that had started so subtly I barely noticed. The criticism that eroded my confidence. The isolation from friends and family. The financial restrictions. The endless, impossible expectations. And finally, the Christmas dinner demand that had opened my eyes completely. Amanda listened without interruption, occasionally wiping away her own tears. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You can stay with me as long as you need," she said. "We'll figure everything out together." Christmas Day found me in Amanda's small apartment, surrounded by actual love instead of the performance of it. We ate takeout Chinese food and watched old movies, a stark contrast to the elaborate dinner I had been commanded to prepare. My phone continued to explode with notifications. Ethan's progression was predictable confusion turning to pleading, then to anger, then to threats. "Where are you? Call me immediately." "Maeve, this is completely irresponsible. My career is at stake." I'm worried about you. Please just let me know you're safe. If you don't come home right now, you'll regret it. I've frozen our joint accounts until you come to your senses. I read each message with a growing sense of confirmation that I had made the right decision. Not once did he say he missed me. Not once did he apologize. His concern was entirely for his dinner, his career, his embarrassment. From mutual acquaintances, I learned what had happened at the house. Ethan had awakened to find me gone and the dinner preparations abandoned. Rather than canceling, he had frantically called caterers offering triple their holiday rates to salvage the situation. The guests had arrived to a chaotic scene, store-bought appetizers hastily arranged on plates. A hired server who didn't know where anything was kept. Ethan alternating between forced joviality and barely concealed rage. Patterson, the firm's senior partner, had apparently asked about my absence. Ethan's explanation about a family emergency fell apart when someone mentioned seeing my car at a highway rest stop that morning, clearly packed for more than a short trip. The dinner had ended early with Ethan's carefully orchestrated seating plan in disarray, and his hopes for partnership announcement dashed. In abandoning his command performance, I had inadvertently revealed the truth about our marriage to his entire professional circle. Surprisingly, 2 of his colleagues' wives reached out to me in the days that followed. Women I had served countless meals to, whose polite smiles had masked their own stories. I always saw how he treated you, one wrote in a private message. My husband isn't much different. You're brave to leave. The other was more direct. He humiliated you at Thanksgiving. We all noticed. None of us blamed you for leaving. Their messages were both validating and heartbreaking. How many women were living as I had been, measuring their worth by their husband's approval, shrinking themselves to fit someone else's expectations? 3 days after Christmas, my parents arrived at Amanda's apartment, having cut short their own holiday celebrations to support me. My father, usually so stoic, had tears in his eyes as he hugged me. We should have said something sooner, my mother whispered. We saw what was happening, but we didn't want to interfere. It wouldn't have mattered, I assured her. I wasn't ready to see it myself. On December 28th, Ethan showed up unannounced at Amanda's door. I was alone in the apartment, my sister having reluctantly gone to work after I insisted I would be fine. When the doorbell rang, I assumed it was the grocery delivery we had scheduled. Instead, I opened the door to find Ethan standing there, unshaven and disheveled, in a way I had never seen him. For a moment, I felt a reflexive urge to apologize, to comfort him, to fix whatever was causing his distress. 7 years of conditioning didn't disappear overnight. But then I noticed his clenched jaw, the cold anger in his eyes beneath the performance of despair. This was not a man who missed his wife. This was a man whose property had been taken without permission. You need to come home now, he said without preamble. This little tantrum has gone on long enough. I started to close the door, but he blocked it with his foot. Ethan, please leave. I don't want to talk to you right now. Talk? He laughed harshly. There's nothing to talk about. You embarrassed me in front of the entire firm. You sabotaged my career. You owe me Maeve. The clarity that had come to me Christmas morning remained strong. I don't owe you anything. Our marriage was not a business transaction. Please leave before I call the police. His face contorted with a rage I had glimpsed only in flashes before. Call the police. On your husband. Don't be ridiculous. You're coming home with me today. He pushed against the door, and for the first time I felt physically afraid of him. I had known emotional intimidation, but this was different. Amanda's voice came from behind him, sharp with authority. Step away from my door right now, Ethan. He turned, startled, to find my sister standing in the hallway, cell phone in hand. This is between me and my wife, he snapped. She's not your property, Amanda replied, her finger hovering over her phone screen. And this is my home. Leave now, or I'm calling 911. You've always hated me, he accused, turning his anger toward her. You've poisoned her against me. She's not coming back, Amanda stated firmly. She's not your servant, she's not your trophy, and she's not going to be controlled by you anymore. For a moment, I thought he might actually strike her. The mask of civility had slipped, completely revealing the true nature beneath. Then, seeming to remember himself, he straightened his shoulders and adjusted his coat. This isn't over, he said, looking at me with cold determination. When you've calmed down and realized what you've thrown away, don't expect a warm welcome. After he left, I shook so violently that Amanda had to help me to the couch. I've never seen him like that, I whispered. Not completely like that. That's who he really is, she said gently. The rest is just packaging. When Ethan refused to leave the building, lingering in the lobby, and trying to intimidate the doorman into letting him back up, Amanda did call the police. Watching from the window as officers escorted him to his car was surreal. This man, who had always been so concerned with appearances, now creating a public scene. The following week was a blur of practical arrangements. I hired a lawyer specializing in divorce cases involving financial control. I opened a new bank account at a different institution than the one Ethan and I had used. I froze my credit to prevent him from opening accounts in my name. My principal, upon hearing a carefully edited version of events, was immediately supportive. Take whatever time you need, she said. Your job will be waiting when you're ready to return. Ethan's attempts to undermine me weren't limited to financial maneuvers. He contacted the school board with vague allegations of unstable behavior and concerns about my fitness to teach. Fortunately, my years of dedicated service and stellar evaluations spoke louder than his insinuations. My colleagues rallied around me, offering everything from legal referrals to temporary housing options. Many confessed they had noticed my withdrawal over the years, but hadn't known how to help. Their support now was both heartening and a reminder of the community I had nearly lost completely. Finding my own apartment was both terrifying and exhilarating. The small one-bedroom wasn't in a prestigious neighborhood. The furniture was second-hand rather than designer. The kitchen appliances were basic rather than professional grade, but every item in it was chosen by me for me. The space reflected my preferences, not Ethan's standards. For the first time in years, I felt at home. That first night alone in my new place was both frightening and liberating. Without Ethan's presence, without his expectations and judgments, the silence felt unfamiliar, but increasingly welcome. I cried, yes, but they were tears of release rather than despair. I was mourning the marriage I had thought I had, not the reality I had escaped. As I unpacked my few belongings, I realized how little of our shared life had actually been mine. The books I had loved, the coffee mug from my first classroom, the quilt my grandmother had made. These simple items meant more to me than all the luxury goods Ethan had surrounded us with. I slept that night with the windows open, something Ethan had never allowed because it disrupted the climate control system. The cool air and distant city sounds were my lullaby, the soundtrack of my new beginning. The journey from that first night in my apartment to true healing was neither quick nor straightforward. Divorce proceedings stretched on for months as Ethan fought every attempt at equitable division of assets. His need for control extended to ensuring I received as little as possible, even when it cost him more in legal fees than the items were worth. 2 months after leaving, I began therapy with a counselor specializing in emotional abuse recovery. Dr. Landon helped me recognize patterns I had accepted as normal, the slow erosion of boundaries that had characterized my marriage. What you experienced has a name, she told me during our 3rd session. Coercive control. It's about power, not love. Those words were both painful and validating. I hadn't imagined the dynamic. I hadn't been too sensitive or too demanding. The relationship had been fundamentally unhealthy, and recognizing that was the first step toward healing. The financial reality of starting over was challenging. My teacher's salary, which had once been entirely absorbed into our joint expenses, now had to cover rent, utilities, food, and legal fees. I took on tutoring jobs in the evenings, working with struggling readers for extra income. Ironically, these sessions became a source of joy rather than just financial necessity. Working one-on-one with children who needed extra support reminded me why I had become a teacher in the first place. Their progress, small victories celebrated without judgment, healed something in me that Ethan's criticism had damaged. Gradually, I reconnected with friends who had drifted away during my marriage. Coffee dates with former colleagues, phone calls with college roommates, family dinners with my parents and sister. Each interaction helped rebuild my sense of self outside of being Ethan's wife. There were setbacks, of course. Days when I questioned my decision, especially when the divorce proceedings became particularly nasty. Moments when I missed the security, if not the reality of my married life. Nights when I lay awake wondering if I would ever trust enough to love again. But these moments became less frequent as I reclaimed pieces of myself. I joined a book club focusing on women authors. I volunteered at a community garden. I repainted my apartment in colors Ethan would have considered garish, but that made me smile every time I came home. 3 months after leaving, I developed a new educational initiative for children experiencing family transitions. Drawing on my own experience, I created a curriculum that helped kids process change through art and storytelling. The principal approved it immediately, and the positive response from both students and parents was overwhelming. "You seem different," one of my fourth graders observed bluntly one afternoon. "Happier." "I am happier," I confirmed, realizing it was true. Despite the ongoing stress of the divorce, despite the financial struggles, despite the occasional loneliness, I was fundamentally happier than I had been in years. My classroom became my sanctuary, a place where I could make a positive impact without fear of criticism or control. The creativity I had suppressed flourished in lesson plans and classroom decorations. The confidence Ethan had undermined grew stronger with each successful teaching day. Unexpectedly, I found support among other women who had left controlling relationships. A colleague introduced me to an informal group that met monthly to share experiences and resources. These women from various backgrounds and circumstances understood what I was going through in a way even my loving family couldn't fully comprehend. The hardest part for me was learning to make decisions again, shared one woman who had left her husband after 20 years. I would stand in the grocery store paralyzed by choices as simple as what brand of cereal to buy. I nodded, remembering my own moment of panic when choosing paint colors for my apartment. After years of deferring to Ethan's preferences, trusting my own taste felt foreign and frightening. Through these connections, I found strength I didn't know I had. Each woman's story of survival and rebuilding inspired me to continue my own journey even on the difficult days. Ethan's continued attempts at manipulation through the divorce process were predictable, but increasingly ineffective. The more distance I gained, the more clearly I saw his tactics. Demands disguised as reasonable requests. Threats veiled as concerns. Blame shifted to make me responsible for the marriage's failure. My lawyer, a formidable woman who specialized in high-conflict divorces, was unimpressed by his maneuvers. "Standard playbook," she would say, reviewing his latest demands. "We've seen it all before." With her guidance, I learned to communicate only through official channels, to document everything, and to recognize when emotion was being used as a negotiation tactic. These skills, while developed for the divorce process, served me well in rebuilding my life. The day I stopped answering Ethan's non-essential calls and texts was a significant milestone. For years, I had been conditioned to respond immediately to his every communication. Breaking that pattern required conscious effort and support from both my therapist and friends. "He's training you like you'd train a dog," Amanda pointed out when I instinctively reached for my phone at a text notification. You don't have to jump every time he calls. She was right. My autonomy included the right to decide when and how I communicated with my soon-to-be ex-husband. Setting this boundary was both terrifying and empowering. 1 year after leaving, the divorce was finally finalized. The financial settlement was less than I deserved, but enough to provide a fresh start without ongoing entanglements. More importantly, I was legally and emotionally free. To my surprise, losing material wealth had gained me immeasurable personal freedom. The designer clothes and luxury appliances seemed meaningless compared to the joy of making my own choices, setting my own priorities, and living authentically. Dating again was a tentative, sometimes awkward process. My first dinner with a fellow teacher ended with me overthinking every word I had said, expecting criticism that never came. The second date with a kind man I met through a friend was easier, but still tinged with wariness. You apologize a lot, he observed gently over dessert. For things that don't need apologies. I hadn't noticed this habit, another remnant of my marriage. With conscious effort, I began catching myself before the automatic "I'm sorry" escaped for non-offenses like having an opinion or taking an extra minute in the bathroom. Through these experiences, I learned to recognize the difference between healthy relationships and controlling ones, between compromise and surrender, between being valued and being possessed. That Christmas, 1 year after my escape, I hosted a small dinner in my apartment. Nothing elaborate, just a simple meal shared with my parents, Amanda, and a few close friends. I cooked, not because I had to impress anyone, but because I wanted to create something for people I loved. The contrast to the previous Christmas couldn't have been more stark. No commands to be ready by dawn, no list of 40 important guests, no criticism of my efforts. Just genuine warmth, laughter, and the joy of being fully present rather than performing perfection. As we gathered around my mismatched dining set, eating from plates that weren't fine china, I looked at the faces of people who truly cared about me, not what I could do for them. In that moment, I felt a profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me here, difficult as it had been. The road to healing wasn't over. There would still be challenging days, moments of doubt, and new lessons to learn. But I had found my voice again, my strength, my sense of self-worth. I had rediscovered the woman I had been before Ethan, and discovered new aspects of myself I never knew existed. Sometimes walking away is the strongest step forward. In leaving behind the beautiful prison of my marriage, I had found true freedom. In losing the material trappings of success, I had gained authentic happiness. In facing my greatest fear, I had discovered my greatest strength. I no longer measure my worth by someone else's approval. I no longer apologize for taking up space in the world. I no longer mistake control for care or criticism for love. These are the gifts I gave myself when I packed my bags, that Christmas morning, gifts more valuable than anything money could buy. If my story resonates with you, know that you deserve to be valued for who you are, not what you can provide. You deserve relationships built on mutual respect, not power imbalances. You deserve to live authentically, not according to someone else's expectations. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice that ultimately led to freedom? Share your experience in the comments below. Sometimes our stories can be the light that guides others through their own darkness. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this story touched you, and remember that your worth is not determined by what you do for others, but by the simple fact of who you are. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to choose yourself when it matters most.